Who is the strongest? This question is often asked in anime as soon as you realize that the characters are going to be fighting. In the context of Bakugan, the idea of who is the strongest was thrown to us in Season 1 of Battle Brawlers, and the strongest battler was Masquerade after Shun stepped down, more or less, and his newest Bakugan, Hydronoid, was presented to us as the strongest Bakugan of all time, because his G-power was just so much higher than everyone else. Time jump to New Vestroia, and we have a new villain, Spectra, who claims that his goal is to create the ultimate Bakugan. But who exactly is the ultimate Bakugan, and what is it? In these battle type of shows, power creep is definitely a thing, so when one villain shows up claiming they're the strongest, another person's gonna show up being even more powerful. But is the idea of being the ultimate Bakugan an unattainable goal, or is it actually possible outside of, being the main character? In the third season of Bakugan, Gundalian Invaders, we did actually get an answer. The whole point of Battle Brawlers Season 3 is basically a giant war between the Gundalians' leader, Barodius, I think I finally said it right, and the Nethians. The Nethians have something called the Sacred Orb. It's the MacGuffin. And towards the end of Gundalian Invaders, just when he was in the process of attaining the Sacred Orb, Dan Kuso made it up to Herodias, and they were teleported into this sacred realm in front of an entity called Code Eve. Also, their Bakugan, Drago and Darak, were brought there as well, and it turned out that all of them were connected because of today's topic, the Ultimate Warrior Gene. In today's video, I'm going to try my best to explain this massive twist in the lore and break it up into two different sections. First is the lore portion of the Ultimate Warrior Gene, and the second is a theory portion of who could technically have it. Without further ado, let's get started. In the beginning, Code Eve created two Bakugan, the original Dragonoid and Darak. These two were different sides of the same coin. They both also had the potential of being the strongest, and they would later go and create. The original Dragonoid created Vestroia, the original Vestroia. Also, from now on, I'm going to be referring to him as Genesis, since another name for him was Genesis Dragonoid. Anyway, as I just said, Genesis created Vestroia, and he is the ancestor to all the Bakugan from Vestroia, while Daraknoid went to create both Nethia and Gundalia. Just like how all Bakugan in Vestroia were descendants of the original Dragonoid, all Bakugan in Gundalia and Nethia are descendants from Daraknoid. Because the two of them had the potential of being the ultimate Bakugan, it would eventually lead to them battling. So Daraknoid would end up fighting Genesis, with Genesis defeating him and later Fury and the No-Nuts. While we don't know exactly what happened to Daraknoid afterwards, it is presumed that he was killed, probably during the confrontation when he defeated Fury and the No-Nuts and sent them into the Doom Dimension. Which leaves me to at least suspect that the Doom Dimension might be some separate realm that exists between all the worlds. Anyway, if we move on, we know that eventually Drago and Darak were born, and these two are direct descendants of the two original Bakugan that Code Eve made. And because of this, they have the Ultimate Warrior Gene and the potential to be the strongest. The images you see on screen seems to be Phantom Darak and Blitz Dragonoid. And this is where a little theory comes in, but we know Drago evolves quite often, and as he does, he eventually starts to look more and more like Genesis Dragonoid. And even though Darak is a direct descendant of Daraknoid, it is stated that he can't evolve. And the only reason he evolved into Phantom Darak is because he basically was given some of Drago's DNA during a little experiment, which forced an evolution. It's possible that the point of evolution could be the way for their descendants to grow in power and eventually surpass the original two Bakugan. And it could be seen as a visual on the fact that they straight up look like the originals and then evolve past it. That is a theory. Going back to the lore, the last thing I want to bring up is Drago and Darak were given all this information, and then they were allowed to battle to see who was worthy of Code Eve's power, and they would be crowned the ultimate Bakugan. Drago did end up winning, however, Emperor Barodius and Darak tried to take the power for themselves by force, and it looks like despite the constant warnings, it was actually too much power for them to handle, battle and they end up destroying themselves. Drago was then given Code Eve's power and he was evolved into Titanium Dragonoid. I had to look it up just to be sure I got that right. However, Darak and Barodius weren't actually dead. The easiest way I can explain this is the Silent Orb and Code Eve, I guess, basically corrupted them, and they turned into even more darker versions of themselves, and we got Magmel and Ravenoid. And their connection through the Ultimate Warrior gene was used as something called the Gate, and it was a method they used to communicate with each other. To summarize, for anyone who got lost along the way, the Ultimate Warrior gene, more or less, is a genetic trait passed down to the descendants of the original Bakugan. While technically all Bakugan originated from these two, the direct descendants are the ones who actually have it and have the capabilities of becoming the strongest Bakugan. All Bakugan from Nethia and Gundalia came from Darachnoid, and Bakugan from Vestroia came from Genesis Dragonoid. And since New Vestroia is a thing, technically Drago followed in his ancestors' footsteps and created more Bakugan if you think about it. Because we just never saw Bakugan like Helios until New Vestroia. And at least in the dub, Gus goes on and on about how impressive Vulcan's armor is and how it was molded in New Vestroia. And that means Drago basically created Vulcan, if we really think about it. This is never really mentioned, and this could just be more of my theory talk, but take that however you will. But the main question is, does someone need the Ultimate Warrior gene to, quote, be the strongest? And that's kind of where some people could fall off the idea of this twist, because spoilers for Naruto, a similar thing kind of happens with Naruto, with the whole thing being bound around fate and whatnot. And I don't think it's technically true that just because they're descendants of the original Bakugan, that automatically makes them overpowered or whatever. Because you have to admit, at least from Drago and Dan's perspective, they put in a lot of work to get to where they were. And Drago's first evolution wasn't really going to be done on his own, because if Murcho and Runo didn't work together with Dan, he was going to lose that battle and be sent to the Doom Dimension. And to just say that was fate, I think that's downplaying a lot of what they accomplished. You could say the same for Darak, but we didn't really see him till it was time to introduce him. But with that, we are officially done with the lore portion of this video. Now we can go on to the theory and theorize on who could technically have the Ultimate Warrior gene, even though they're not direct descendants. This is mainly going to be for fun, and you guys can tell me what you think in the comments. And while we're on that topic, what do you guys think of the whole Ultimate Warrior gene? I've given you some cliff notes, more or less, to try to make sense of it best I could. It does make more sense if you just watch those episodes on their own, though Mactanium Surge does kind of mutter some things when you really think about it, but in their defense, Bakugan's world building has always been kind of iffy. Yeah, that's the word. Anyway, let's move on to the theory. Okay, so this is me post-recording, and I wanted to correct myself since I made a little mistake in here. What I was talking about was something called the switch code, and the only reason I really have it on here is because it could be seen as being something that's connected to the whole Ultimate Warrior gene thing. More or less, it's if a Bakugan is battling with their destined partner and that bond is strong enough, they can unlock the switch code, more or less. And what that is, according to Magmel, he says that it acts as a key while his Bakugan, Darak, Ravenoid, whatever, has the gate, more or less. And the key is basically him unlocking like the hidden potential within the Bakugan because of the original DNA of the original Darachnoid or whatever. And if they're in sync, they can summon Mectagon, and if they're in sync with their Mectagon, they can summon their Mectagon Titan. Again, this is more or less the cliff notes of it. It still doesn't make the most sense in the world, because they quite literally say destiny. It could imply that, well, here's all these other characters and they're really strong. They're just not in sync as much as we thought they were. And this is why I'm not really too big on the whole Mectagon thing. Except for Zethon, he was cool. Anyway, let's get on to the theory. Okay, so who has the Ultimate Warrior gene? Or who could have the Ultimate Warrior gene? I'm gonna go over some possible options, and we'll go go into why I think they couldn't have it. So to get right into it, first up, we have Hydronoid. Hydronoid, a very powerful Bakugan, and he is the only rival Bakugan that was able to evolve multiple times without any wacky shenanigans, right? He didn't use the forbidden ability cards and experiment on himself. He didn't need Drago's DNA spliced into him, and he certainly didn't use any mechanical contraptions to help him evolve. And since we're rambling about theories, it is said that he feeds off the Bakugan that he sends to the Doom Dimension. If there is some connection to the Doom Dimension and Genesis Dragonoid, besides the fact that, well, you know, he sent his worst enemies there, that could somewhat link the two even more. And while we're on the topic of the Doom Dimension, we can throw Leonidas in this category of could as well. I mean, he was born from the Doom Dimension and is a very, very powerful Bakugan. Yeah, he's not canon because he's just from a video game, but you get the point. By the end of the game, Leonidas is pretty much assumed to be the most powerful Bakugan. I mean, the game ends with the player character being the #1 ranked battler in the world after beating everyone. And if you made Leonidas Pyrrhus, he does kind of look like Drago. To summarize these two up, I think perhaps maybe the Doom Dimension might have something that could somewhat trigger the DNA to activate the gene inside of them, which could explain why are they getting stronger as time goes on. I know this is a bit of a loose, wacky theory, because I gotta go off of another theory I haven't even fully thought up of, so this could just be me yapping. They're also both Dragon-type Bakugan. That said, I don't think necessarily being a Dragon-type Bakugan automatically means you have it, but before I go too far into that, like Drago, Helios did also start on all fours, and eventually as he evolved, he started his hind legs just like Drago. It could just be because they're both Darkus, but Hydronoid also kinda looks like Darak. Again, this also could just be the fact that they're both Dragon-type Bakugan. Like I said, just because they're Dragon-type Bakugan doesn't necessarily mean that I think they could have it. The best examples would probably be Naga. Naga for a while was the strongest. However, for those who don't remember, he was one of the white ones. They are special Bakugan that didn't have attributes, and if he had the Ultimate Warrior gene and just had the potential just to be super overpowered from the get-go, he wouldn't want the Silent Core in the first place. At least I don't think he would. Not as badly as he desperately wanted it. Because that was like his thing. He was tired of basically being an outcast. And there's other two examples that I also want to throw at you. Well, before we get to them, Wyvern would also be in this category. But Wyvern was chill about, you know, how she was. Anyway, if we move on to New Vestroia, next we have Percival and Hydronoid. Well, his head kind of looks like a dragon, so I don't entirely know if he's supposed to be one. He also has this vampire aesthetic going for him. So the main reason Percival's a no for me is because there's just nothing really interesting about him. Like, he doesn't have any crazy showings that he might have the potential, you know what I mean? Like, at the most, he also was like a little spin Bakugan like Drago, and he had 450, while Drago only had 400, and some of the others only had 400, but that's kind of about it. And Drago only had 400 because they straight up told him that, well, you're not going to be as strong as you used to be. And Helios is the big one. So Helios is really, really, really powerful. And I think that's just it. He's strong because of his own natural talents, not because of the Ultimate Warrior gene. Because if he had it, I don't think he would have needed the mechanical enhancements. Because he upgraded himself quite often to keep up with Drago. And even before that, he needed the forbidden ability cards. Now, yes, Drago ended up using a forbidden ability card too, but this was because Spectra was trying to force Drago to use the Infinity Core. And at least how I see it, when he comes back in Magtanium Surge, he does have a different attribute and some more cyber enhancements, though he looks more like the old version of himself. Anyway, he does end up fighting Ravenoid with Shun's new partner at the same time, and they get completely trashed on. Now, yes, at this point, Ravenoid was presumed to be the ultimate OP final opponent for the series, as We just don't see a Bakugan as strong as this dude. But taking things at face value, I do think it's kind of also the point of Helios. He wants to be strong as Drago, but he doesn't have, in his eyes, what makes Drago special. For a while, he's convinced it's just the Infinity Core. So to catch up to him, he becomes Cyborg Helios, and then upgrades to Mark II, and then he needs the battle gear, and all these things to try to beat Drago, and he, well, can't consistently. If we move on to Gundalian Invaders, a weird one is, I'm gonna butcher this, but Neo. We'll just call him Neo. I want to say his name is Zip Zap, but we'll call him Neo. Now, Neo had a portion of the sacred orb called the Element, and he had this weird little connection with Drago. I don't know if this is because he had the Ultimate Warrior gene, maybe he's this Elseworld version of Drago, but it seemed to be that Neo was just this strong just because he had the element. I'm not entirely sure about this one. It's a really, really big maybe. It would explain at least why give a portion of the Sacred Orb's power to this Bakugan, as he had it for quite a while. The dub does take out the flashback, so some people probably don't know what I'm talking about. But he had it for quite a while. You guys let me know. Do you think Neo had it? Anyway, next we have the last one, and I think this could answer one of the biggest mysteries of the Bakugan verse, and it is Lionheart. Lionheart is here for the sole reason that he has the forbidden power and this unknown potential that he reaches at the very end of the story, which basically makes him revive / heal everyone that was fighting throughout the battle. I say revive because some people, at least to me, seemed pretty obvious that they were dead. Like Fabia was really high up, and unless the dub cut some extra stuff because it didn't fact check this, she fell really far, and that fall should have definitely killed her. Like, Arnott didn't even get a chance to break her fall. Anyway, I went over this in my Ren video, but to summarize, Lionheart is this special Bakugan that has a forbidden power. It is really, really, really dangerous to the point where Barodius locked them up, and he wants to use its power to essentially help him win the war, along with his own personal uses. And when it activates for us for the first time, it's when Lionheart is fighting Darak, who does have the Ultimate Warrior gene. And it was so dangerous, right? Dragonoid Colossus, which is basically the final defense of the Sacred Orb, showed up to attack Lionheart and Ren when he was losing control of his forbidden power. Not Parodius or Darak, the guy who actually has the Ultimate Warrior gene. He attacked Ren and Lionheart. And this always seemed like it was a big deal to me, and it really, really sucks that because it's just so ridiculously overpowered, Ren was technically nerfed throughout most of this season. But if he does have the gene, it's just not as, I guess, I don't know, potent, prominent? I don't really know the word, but maybe it's just not as big of a connection to, or at least compared to Drago and Darak. Like, the whole reason I'm going through these theories is maybe they could have it, but they're not direct 100% descendants of the original Bakugan, like a distant relative. Darak also calls out Lionheart right before the final battle, as he wants him to use the forbidden power against him, because he claims it's the only way he's going to be able to beat him. Maybe Lionheart intrigued Darak, and he wanted the extra challenge, who knows, but this is like the big reason I wanted to go into the theory portion, if I'm being honest, because him and Neo are definitely the ones that I feel like could have easily have it if we learned a little bit more about them. Neo was a bit hard because he died, but a lot of the questions around Lionheart could have been answered if this was the revelation. Now, I also want to preface that probably why they didn't go into this is for two reasons. One, if we're not counting the fact that Materium Surge was cut into 2 parts, Gundalian Invaders is the shortest season, so they probably just ran out of time. And two, the thing that could easily throw this theory out, or give them a couple of plot holes if they did plan this and then didn't think it all the way through, is the fact that, well, Code Eve just doesn't bring it up if Lionheart actually did have the gene or not. We just don't know. But that will do it for the theory portion. This is a bit more of a lengthy video than I was expecting, just because I added this second portion in there. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know I've been saying that a lot, but I really want to get an interaction with you guys, because I think this could be a interesting theory for the Bakugan community to discuss. Not that I'm really big in there or anything, or I haven't interacted with a lot of them besides you guys, but I do think it's an interesting topic. Well, without further ado, I'm Mike the Warrior, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.